Welcome, everyone. We are giving you a couple of minutes for people to join. So please bear with us for another couple of minutes. And thank you for joining. Okay, we will get started. Welcome, everyone around the world. Thank you for joining wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you're at. My name is Caroline Moriarty. I'm the Technical Director for the Global Climate Action Partnership, and I am very excited that we are launching this new webinar series, as this is a timely, a good time in the year for starting to talk about the update process for the NDCs that countries will submit in 2025, and also their long-term strategies and the alignment of those. So we will be having a series of webinars. This is the first of a series of about 5 webinars. We will aim for once a month. So please keep an eye on our website, and we will email you with links for upcoming webinars. And today we have very distinguished speakers. We will have the UNFCCC Secretariat and the government of Nigeria represented, sharing the lessons from Nigeria on submitting their LTS. We would love for you to introduce yourselves on the chat, where your names, your position, and where you're coming from, so we know who we're talking to. That would be great if you could do that. And before we get started, I wanted to pass it over to my colleague Sophie, and she will do some housekeeping rules.
Hello, everyone. I'll make this really quick. So as you may have seen as you joined today, this webinar is being recorded, and the purpose for that recording is so that we can share it with all of you and everyone who registered following the event, just so that you can rewatch it and continue to learn from this engaging discussion. As you enter this meeting, you will be automatically muted. That's just so that we can make sure that there's no background noise, so that we can really focus in on what our speakers are discussing. We really highly encourage you to use the chat feature to add comments and share input throughout the presentations today. And also please do use the Q&A function if you have any questions for our speakers, and we'll be sure to take time to answer those questions. If you encounter any technical difficulties, please use the chat feature to message either myself, Sophie Schrader, or my colleague Holly Darrow, and we will try to assist you to the best of our abilities. You can also adjust your audio through the audio settings, and you can also turn on captions if you would like to have captions or interpretation throughout today's session. When you leave today's session, there will be a survey that launches, and we really highly request that you submit some responses to that survey, since your feedback is really valuable to us and will help inform future webinars. So with that, back to you, Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Next slide, please. And just a brief overview of the agenda for today. I will do a quick overview of the Global Climate Action Partnership for those who are not familiar with it. And I will pass it along to Kineshi from the UNFCCC Secretariat, and then Naizamudi Shoma from Nigeria will share the long-term strategy experience with you, and then we'll have time for Q&A And as Sophie noted, please use the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll do the best to address all of the questions. The ones that we cannot address, we'll try to send you some answers via email or address in subsequent webinars. Next slide, please. As I briefly noted earlier, we'll have two distinguished speakers. Mr. Kenichi Kitamura joined the UNFCCC in 2019 and works within the mitigation division, focusing on nationally determined contributions, long-term strategies, and sectorial support. In this role, he supports intergovernmental negotiations on the mitigation work program, conducts analysis of NDCs, LTS, and energy transition efforts, and offers technical support to governments to facilitate the implementation of policies aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Prior to joining the UNFCCC, he worked for Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry, and he holds a Master's of Arts in Law and Diplomacy from Tufts University. Ms. Emuri Shioma Felicitas Ede is an expert on issues of climate change and the environment, working at the Federal Ministry of Environment, Department of Desertification, Land Degradation, and Drought Management in Nigeria, in Abuja, and has spent her years working at local, national, and international levels. She's Nigerian born and based, and is an Assistant Chief Scientific Officer with 15 years of demonstrative experiences in climate movements and environmental issues. We're very much welcome them to this webinar, and thank you for your presentation. Next slide, please. So I'll start with an overview of the Global Climate Action Partnership. Next slide. And just to give you a background, use GCAP for short, but GCAP was first launched in 2011. It was previously called the LEDS Global Partnership, and it was launched with the idea of establishing a platform for collaboration across countries and exchange of lessons and peer learning across countries on developing and implementing their long-term strategy, previously called LEDS and now called the LTS. We have grown over the years to about 4,500 climate leaders around the world, ranging from governments to academia, to NGOs and private sector. So it's a multi-stakeholder platform, if you may. And that's the value of it. It brings different views from different practitioners working on climate around the world. It's free to join. Anybody is welcome. A lot of the work that we do, as I noted, is peer learning and technical collaboration. We also offer technical assistance for early movers to take a step forward and then share that lesson with others in the network, and really ensure that countries are working together and collaborating to accelerate the implementation of NDCs and LTS, and supporting them with ambition raising as well. It is very country and demand focused. So we work through regional platforms in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And through those platforms, countries, practitioners can express what are the needs for the region, that those regions can work collaboratively in regional efforts. And we call them now the communities of practice and leadership groups. And so we have a subset of those that I will present in a couple of slides. Next slide, please. We work with countries on a few key items, thinking about advancing climate action and NDCs and LTS. And it's primarily on policies and regulatory frameworks, and also supporting bankable and replicable projects. So the financing side of things, helping to mobilize investments for implementation of projects. And a big portion of what we do is enhancing capacity in developing countries to really implement those priority measures. And then the lessons are then replicated and shared across the network. So it's much about scalability as well, and replicability. Next slide, please. And just very briefly, each of our regional platforms have a subset of activities that I call them the communities of practice or the leadership groups, depending on how they are structured. And the slide shows the priority topics for each of the regions. So our Africa Climate Action Partnership is working on sustainable livestock management, on rice, methane, emission reductions, carbon markets, clean mini-grids, clean energy mini-grids, the soil organic carbon, and they also have a set of trainings on long-term strategies. Our Asia-led partnership is working on transportation, and previously with a focus on electric vehicles, batteries, and now expanding a bit to look at how to enhance the NDCs with a focus on the transport sector. And they also have a community practice on energy, specifically focused on distributed energy resources, storage, and green hydrogen, and the finance community practice. And the LEDS-LAC platform is focusing on electric mobility and sustainable logistics, on energy, especially on bioenergy and renewable, and we support the renewable energy for Latin America and the Caribbean efforts, and also focus on MRV, decarbonization plans, private sector engagement, and methane emission reduction. The GCAP is guided by a steering committee and a council of leaders, ensuring that developing country governments are part of the governance structure of the platform, really expressing what are the needs from the governments. And we do have a way for all the members to really express what are the needs every year and do a survey. And throughout our regional and global workshops, we make sure that the members can express needs for upcoming years, that we can then jointly design the set of activities that would address those needs. With that, I will pass it along to Mr. Kenichi, who will share with us a little bit about the NDC process and the global stock take, thinking about the upcoming 2025 submissions. Thank you. Mr. Kenichi, please go ahead.
Thank you, Caroline. And this is Kenichi from UNFCCC Secretariat based in Bonn, Germany. And it's great to be here as I can speak with the people who are interested in this important topic of NDC process and the global stock take, and particularly aligning NDCs with long-term strategies. And this engagement activity is really important for us, the Secretariat, as in addition to supporting intergovernmental negotiation and analyzing the report and documents from the parties such as NDCs and long-term strategies. And next slide, please. Let me first begin with some brief overview of what the role of global stocktake and NDCs are within the Paris Agreement mechanism. So the left-hand side of the slide shows the three main goals of the Paris Agreement, which cover mitigation, adaptation, and finance. And today I will focus on mitigation, but the adaptation and the finance part are also important part of the Paris Agreement goals. So in terms of the mitigation, the goal is to keep temperature increase to well below 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees level from the pre-industrial level. And in order to do that, and the Paris Agreement requires the parties, governments, to achieve a peaking of global emission as soon as possible and reduce emissions significantly after that in order to reach a net zero emissions, what we call net zero emission on the second half of this century. So net zero emissions means to balance out emission with the removal of emissions through forests and other means. And the right-hand side shows the ambition cycle under the Paris Agreement. So let me start with the national targets, NDCs on the upper left-hand side of the circle. So this is the planning and the commitment phase of national action. So governments are requested to submit NDC every 5 years from 2020. So the next year is the next due year of NDCs. And going towards the clockwise, after submitting national targets, the phase of implementing action in mitigation, adaptation, means of implementation, which include finance, technology, and capacity building, will go on. Then under enhanced transparency framework, parties are required to report the greenhouse gas emission from their territory, as well as track progress of the NDC implementation. Then every 5 years, global stocktake will be conducted, and the first global stocktake was concluded in Dubai last December in 2023, and then it will continue every 5 years. So this global stocktake is to review collective action against the goals of the Paris Agreement and commit to further action, support, and international cooperation. So based on this global stocktake, all parties are requested to prepare this next national determined contribution, taking into account their national circumstances. Next slide, please. And the next slide will show the timeline of this Paris Agreement mechanism. So BTR is acronym of Biannual Transparency Report. The first BTR is due by the end of this year. And in this report, party will report the greenhouse gas emissions level, as well as tracking progress of their current NDCs, which most of the countries submitted in 2020 or onwards. And in the middle of the figure shows the NDCs, and NDC 3.0 is circled in red, and which is due next year, 2025. And on the right-hand side is LTLS. It is the same acronym with LTLS, it's long-term strategies. And most of the countries, as of today, 74 parties submitted the long-term strategy, and most of them set the ambitious long-term mitigation goal to reach net zero emission in mid-century, most commonly 2050. And one of the key issues is how the emissions collectively currently going up still hasn't yet reached the peak, can reduce to net zero as committed by many long-term strategies. So the question of this alignment between long-term goal and mid-term, short-term actions in NDCs are really critical. And next slide, please. So this slide briefly describes the outcome of global stocktake. I will touch upon mitigation aspect in more detail in the next slides, but what I wanted to describe in this slide is, again, not only mitigation, but also other areas of the Paris Agreement are really important, and global stocktake has a key outcome on different aspects. For example, adaptation, means of implementation regarding the finance goals and technology implementation plan and the capacity building support. And also avert and minimize loss and damage from the impact of climate change, as well as to advance just transition and international cooperation. And the cross-cutting elements include urgency for action, because if we, as a global level, not reducing emissions significantly at the required scale and speed, soon this world will reach the temperature increase of 1.5 degrees and then 2 degrees Celsius. And equity between countries and the different generation, as well as the information from best available science, are also highlighted. And sustainable development is another important aspect of the Paris Agreement. So the emission reduction needs to go hand in hand with sustainable development. And the right-hand side is the elements of guidance and the way forward. I will come back to this point later, but important elements of guidance and the way forward is, again, NDC, long-term strategy, and binary transfer sports. And to also mainstream global stocktake outcome into national policy and decision. Next slide, please. So this slide summarizes the mitigation outcome of global stocktake, particularly actionable elements. Actionable elements means not just take note or recognize blah, 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 but call for actions or requests to the parties. The left-hand side is the summary of actionable elements on NDCs and long-term strategies. Some are already indicated in the previous COP CMA decision, such as to request to revisit current NDC targets to align with the Paris Agreement temperature goal, and urge to submit long-term strategy towards just transition to net zero by around mid-century by COP29. And the new elements from global stocktake outcome is encourage next NDC to be ambitious, economy-wide, including all GHG sectors categories aligned with the 1.5 degree goal. And the next bullet point mentions that the encouragement to the parties to prepare next NDCs aligned with long-term strategies. And the other elements of this slide mention key aspects such as transition to sustainable production and consumption, including circular economy, which is broadly a part of SDG 12, and also preserve and restore coastal and nature ecosystem, which is other part of the SDGs. And right-hand side have extensive outcome on energy transition. As you may have already heard of, some key outcomes such as tripling renewable energy power capacities and doubling annual rate of energy efficiency improvements by 2030. So in the next 5.5 years. And also transitioning away from fossil fuels in energy system in a just, orderly, and equitable manner to achieve net zero by 2050. So these are the key outcomes of global stocktake. And the question right now is how parties and governments and the stakeholders will translate these global goals into national level commitments and policy and actions such as investment and joint project with private sector. And that is the question right now. And in terms of the NDCs, we will see when the government submit the next NDC in next year. And then Secretariat will prepare a synthesis report of a national determined contribution, which will indicate the global trajectory greenhouse gas emissions and also key elements of mitigation, adaptation, and means of implementation, and other aspects such as gender. And next slide, please. So guidance and the way forward on NDCs. There are some requests and new elements coming out from the global stocktake. The first 4 parties requested to present their next NDC at the special event to be held and the UN Secretary General. The date and the form is still TBC. And under the UNFCCC process, the SB subsidiary body chairs and secretariat will organize annual GST dialogue, where we will learn how the outcome of global stocktake are informing the next NDCs. And some key mechanism and organization are requested to provide capacity building support to prepare and communicate next NDCs. Because in some cases or many countries, particularly developing countries, the capacity building support will enable mainstreaming climate change consideration and also to prepare NDCs with ownership from the countries. So this is important, so the ownership of countries is important because we don't want to have external consultants just to prepare the documents for the sake of submission, but rather we would like to have countries to prepare NDCs aligned with their national development goals, sectoral policies, and finance plans and investments, so that this national determined contribution itself and its preparation and implementation process can drive sustainable development and the real emission reduction. And the last three on the last bullet point mentioned the roadmap to mission 1.5, which will be implemented under the 3 COP presidency and UAE, Azerbaijan, and Brazil. The purpose of this initiative is to enhance international cooperation and enabling environment to stimulate ambitious next round of NDCs. The right-hand side element describes some technical elements. And again, this topic of alignment of NDCs and long-term strategies are critical. And there are several decisions agreed at the global level what NDC needs to include, such as baseline and targets and the time frame and assumptions. While the content of long-term strategy is very flexible, there is no prescriptive guidance what country needs to include, but still, and the submission of long-term strategy is voluntary, but many countries like most recently Nigeria took efforts to consult with stakeholders and come up with many targets, goals, and visions to drive the climate action in a way that contribute to their national development and global action to reduce emissions. And let me stop here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing perspectives and presentation from Nigeria to see how these global stocktake outcome can be translated into national level. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kenishi, much appreciated. We'll now pass it over to Ms. Moody Chioma, who will share the example of Nigeria on designing and submitting their LTS. If you have questions to Mr. Kenishi, please type those in the Q&A feature of Zoom, and then we'll address at the end. Ms. Moody, can you hear us? You're muted currently.
So good afternoon, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
We can hear you and see you very well. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Chioma. I'm the DEX officer for the NDC and the LT-LEDs in Nigeria. So I work with National Council on Climate Change now. I'm no more with the Ministry of Environment. National Council on Climate Change is now the Nigeria focal point to UNFCCC on issues of climate actions. So today I would be sharing our experiences on what we have done so far on the issues of the NDC and also the LTS-LED. So basically, we updated our NDC like every other person within the UNFCCC party to the Paris Agreement. We formulated the first one in 2015, then we did the revision following the global guideline in 2020, which was submitted in June 2021 because of COVID. So what we did was to update the base years and also to calculate the emissions. So we focused on the highest sectors of emission in Nigeria, and those sectors are the energy, agriculture, forestry, and other land use. We also considered the issues of waste, which was not integrated in the first submitted NDC. So we also considered the industrial sector, which is the industrial process and product use. So basically, the updated NDC did the assessment of GHG emissions for 2018 is estimated to be 347 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. So basically, the energy sector contributes 60% of that 60% of the total emission in Nigeria. And that is aggregated to 20%, which aggregated to 86.75 million metric tons of CO2s. Then the waste sector is also 9% of the national emission and is about 31.2 million metric tons. So we also considered the IPPU, which is 5%, and it aggregated to 17.4 million metric tons of CO2. So without intervention, it is projected that emission will increase to approximately 452 million metric tons of CO2 by 2030. So the communicated NDC is about, the unconditional one is 20%, while the conditional one is 47%, which means that if we have support from the international organization in terms of technology transfer, capacity building, finance, then Nigeria will be reducing its national emission by 47%. So I will go through how the LTS was drafted, and also you have to consider, also note that the drafting of the LTS we kickstarted by revising what was in the communicated updated NDC. So the first step we did was to assess the current NDC and the LTV. So we submitted the long-term vision in COP26 at Glasgow in 2021. So that vision was like a vision for what Nigeria aspired to communicate in the long-term emission development strategies. We understood the goals and the target, the sector covered, and also the implementation status. We identified areas for improvement and also the areas to be updated. So the second one is that we analyzed the data, the climate data and trends. We gathered updated climate data, scientific reports, and also trend analysis. We understood the current and projected impact of climate change. That was the second step during the drafting of Nigeria's long-term emission development strategies. So the third step was we did a holistic stakeholder engagement. We engaged with different sectors. We engaged first and foremost with the decision makers of the government entities. We engaged with the private sectors. We engaged with the subnational government. We engaged with the CSOs, the NGOs, the industrial representative across all the states in Nigeria, and we also went down to the communities. We gathered input on what they need to see that was not reflected in the submitted NDC, that could be reflected in the LTS, that will also facilitate the seamless ownership and implementation of that document. We got feedbacks and also got suggestions from that engagement. So the first step we did was to review international commitment, consider the Paris Agreement and the commitment made by other countries. We looked at other countries submitted LTS. We also aligned to ensure alignment and also to make sure that our Nigeria's LTS is very competitive and is holistic in approach. So that was the first step we took. So the fifth step we did was to set the targets and the goals. So we set the targets considering the economic benefit of those targets. We also established revised targets based on what was communicated in the NDCs. Also, the goals was based on assessment of consultations. The goals and the target was aligned with all the other ministries and agencies, pockets and buckets or pockets of agenda and goals. So the fifth, the setting up the target, we did the decarbonization scenarios for achieving the net zero in 2060. What Nigeria actually, the past administration during the COP26 in Glasgow declared that Nigeria will be achieving net zero by 2060. So we aligned that declaration with the development of Nigeria's NDC, Nigeria's LTS. So we considered 4 scenarios. Which one? The first one is the business as usual scenarios. If nothing is being done, if everything is left the way it is, we did assessment of that. Then we did assessment of the current policy scenarios. We did assessment of the gas economy scenarios. Then finally, we did assessment of the renewable energy scenarios. So the business as usual, imagine that nothing changed, and this we keep flaring the gases, we'll keep doing the open dumping system, we'll keep practicing the old ways of agricultural practice, we'll keep doing the issue without having modern ways of transportation system, we'll keep doing using unsustainable energy practices and all that. So this is what we considered in the current business as usual scenarios. So in the current policy scenarios, we did we renewed all the policy document that has been developed in Nigeria, and we did assessment of those policy documents and was also subjected it to the macro economics verification. So we also did the gas scenarios. So the gas scenarios focused on aggressive exploitation of gas resources, which is about 58 of power generation from natural gas with carbon capturing as conversation, that's CCS. We also did the scenarios about the residential sector. We also did the scenarios about the clean cooking in Nigeria, looking at the population of people who depend on the issues of on biomass for their own clean cooking. So we did also the scenarios about the natural gas. So the natural gas also, in the natural gas, we also looked at model shift of the public modes of transportation with buses and vehicle accounting to almost 50% and 20% respectively by 2060, and car to taxis accosting for almost the remaining 30%. So this is all we did in the issues of gas scenario. In the renewable energy scenario, which was the overall scenario that will also be the vehicle that will transport Nigeria to net zero by 2060. What we did is to renew the renewable energy scenario, envisage ambitious Nigeria emission reduction to net zero by 2060. It assumes that 98% of zero emission in energy sector in the renewable through the nuclear power to align with the Nigerian nuclear power program that is really ongoing. And also the issues of clean cooking was also brought on board. So basically this is the further emission waste will be decreased by, in 2030, there will be reduction in waste emission from waste by 5%. In 2040, there will be reduction of emission by 10%. And in the 2050, there will also be a emission reduction by 15%. And in 2050, there will be emission reduction by 20%. So basically, the sixth step we took was to identify priority sectors. What are the sectors that will reduce Nigeria's emission? So we determined the key sectors for emission reduction and adaptation measures. We also considered what are the economic benefits of those reducing emission from those sectors, and also how these sectors is going to impact in the local communities. And we consider the most impacted sectors with the highest emission trajectories. So these are the sectors we actually focused activity to reduce our emission from: waste, forest, and other land use. We also talked about the power sector, building, and residential. So, and the final one is the oil and gas sector. We reviewed different policies. We review different policy documents, develop regulations, incentives, and also investment, and also, sorry for that break, and achieve the alignment. This also allowed Nigeria to achieve the alignment between the NDC and the LT-LETs. So basically, these are the documents, existing documents within Nigeria that we have reviewed. We have reviewed to make sure that is aligned with the Nigeria's long-term low emission development strategies. The first one in the list, which I've also mentioned, is the NDC. The second one is the Energy Transition Plan. The third one is Nigeria Climate Act. The fourth one is the Nigeria's National Development Plan. The fifth one is Agenda 2050. The sixth one is National Climate Change Policy. The seventh one is National Climate Change Program for Nigeria. The eighth one considered was the Economic Sustainability Plan of Nigeria. Then the last one we did was the Nigeria 2050 Calculator. So this document was aligned with the view of the LTS. So the eighth step we took was to assess the implementation challenges. What are the possible challenges that we are going to face in implementing Nigeria's long-term emission development strategies? We talked about the issues of funding. We talked about the technology availability. We talked about capacity building. We talked about stakeholder engagement, and we also identified potential challenges within what the political undertones will actually we will be facing because of the nature of the political issues in Nigeria. So we put all those things into consideration when we developed the NDC, the LTS-led. So the cost benefits analysis was done as step 9. We conducted analysis to assess economic, social, and environmental impact. We understood the implications of the implementation of the revised NDC and also the new developed LTLETs. So the cost and the benefits analysis were done holistically. So the third step was the LTS drafting. We created a document with updated targets, conditions, timelines, and implementation strategies. And this document was subjected to a lot of stakeholder validation exercises. We took it to subnational government. We engaged with the commissioners of environment. We engaged with the CSO from different states. We engaged with men in business. We engaged with the media, the youth. Also, we engaged with schools to see if this document, it will be holistically owned by every Nigeria. So we sought feedback from them, and this feedback was integrated, subjected to review, and also was subjected. We also shared the feedbacks and the what we got from the large stakeholder involvement with partners who has helped Nigeria so far in achieving all the climate agendas, or they looked into the document and made holistic input into it, which refined the content and also the direction of the document. So basically, this step 12 finalized the launch and the submission. So the LTS was subjected to national validation November before we headed to COP28 in Dubai. So we, on the 1st of December 2023 in Dubai at COP and the Pavilion of the African Union, where Nigeria launched its long-term emission development strategies. So after that, we submitted this document just a few weeks ago to the UNFCCC. And yesterday, we held the first public presentation and socialization of this document with different stakeholders, which is cut across the technical directors from ministries, agencies, and departments, the CSOs, and also several other stakeholders. The youth were there, the parliamentarians, no, the parliamentarian was not there. The youth were there, and also the NGOs, the media, all of them were there. So this evening, we're planning a high-level dinner to socialize this and present this document with the decision makers, which are the parliamentarians, the ministers, the head of agencies, the CEOs, the private sector, and we'll be doing that today. So on the issues of monitoring and reporting, Nigeria has kick-started the process of doing the national stocktake. So that national stocktake is supported through the NDC partnership. Office of the British High Commission is actually supporting Nigeria to achieve that objective. So we have done the inception reporting, and what that needs, the main objective is to assess what Nigeria has actually achieved in terms, well, since we submitted the NDC in 2015. And with the support we have received from the European Union, we've been able to do a sectoral MRV system, sectoral MRV for different sectors. We have done for energy, we have also done for waste, and we have done for transport, and they're also assisting us to do the institutional MRV system for Nigeria. So this is what we have done in that, and we are trying to also integrate what we are doing within the LTS and also align it to what we are doing with the NDC. Currently, we are developing a net zero investment plan. So from there, we are considering what are the costing of the LTLEDs and also the costing of the NDC. And we're also trying now to launch the NDC implementation framework, which is also aligned to the short-term goal of the NDC, will fit into the long-term plans of the LTLEDs. So basically, this is my last slide. And as always, environmental sustainability is an individual responsibility. Do try to contribute your own quotes today. Thank you all for your attention. I'll be here listening for questions. And over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Mudin. Congratulations on being in the forefront of submitting the LTS this year. That's terrific to see this effort that you went through with your country counterparts to consult with all these different stakeholders. I think the audience, I haven't seen any questions emerging at this point, but I do have a few questions for both of the panelists, if that's okay. I guess the one question for both of you is if you have any recommendations for other countries on how to best go about aligning the LTS and the NDC processes. Amuri, based on your experience in Nigeria, and Mr. Kenichi, based on what you're seeing from all the countries submitting their NDCs and their LTS, if there are any emerging best practices that you can share with this group and the community. Maybe Mr. Kenichi, you can go first.
Yes. I'm a bit hesitant to say the best practice or good practices, but what I find it interesting, it might be helpful for other countries is that, let me put the 2 points. The 1 point is scenarios. As Nigeria, Kioma described that scenarios up to the mid-centuries, if that scenario includes midterm milestone like 2030, 2040, or 2050, that will help countries to design the investment and policy intervention to achieve long-term goal. For example, in building, if building today, a building built today and the next 10 years will be used for the next 30 or 40 decades, depending on the country. So it would be better to have a focused policy intervention now to those long-term assets with long lifetime. And another point is governance and the institutional arrangement. So long-term strategy is voluntary document. It's up to countries how to utilize that strategies. If there is no mechanism to implement, review, monitor the pathway to a long-term goal, then it will be really difficult to translate such long-term strategy into the short-term policy and plans. Particularly long-term low-emission development strategy usually cover the broad range of sectors as Kioma described, the energy, industry, the forestry, agricultural waste, and it is often the case that the ministry in charge of these sectoral policies sometimes not well aware of this Paris Agreement mechanism and climate change consideration, but with a strong governance mechanism, the key elements of a long-term strategy can be translated to different policy fields. These are the 2 points I can think of right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kenichi. Ms. Amudi, would you like to?
Yes. Yes, of course, I would like to add to what he has said, and thank you very much for saying that. The very first thing that works with us is holistic stakeholder mapping. Holistic stakeholder engagement. You have to reach out to every sector. Every stakeholder is a key player for implementation. You have to reach out to the decision makers. You have to reach out to subnational government, the private sector, the CSOs, the NGOs, the youth, and the academia. They have real different roles to play, and make sure you have broad engagement for that. The other one is to do data analysis. You must do a holistic data analysis to know what is the economic benefit of all the actions that you are going to undertake. And the third one for me is policy alignment. You have to align your development with all the existing policies to make sure that when you pick up the LTS, it has integral part of the existing policies. It will make it very, very seamless during implementation, so there will be no lapses. And again, ownership. You must advertise, socialize it, present it to different stakeholders to own the sectors, to own the mitigation actions of all the sectors, to align the mitigation action identified in the LTS with their own work plan. And again, you have to indicate the parliamentarians who is approving the national budgets. They will make sure that there's greening of the budgets, so that whichever ministries, agencies that is seeking for money from the appropriation must have climate reasoning in all the projects they have identified. capacity building is a very key point. You have to build the capacities of DEX officers who will be responsible for the implementation of this activity. You build different capacity building in the power sector, for example. You identify the key players in the power sector, you identify the agencies within the power ministry, you identify the CSO working in issues of power, you identify the private sector working in issues of power, then you build the capacity of those people to be able to use the new emerging technologies as it comes forth. And the last one for me is to make sure there is an established MRV system to track progress. The progress is not only for you to know what you have achieved in its implementation, but to also make sure that that MRV will fit into the annual reporting to different key stakeholders, like the political head, in making sustainable plans for the nation. And lastly, they must align the short time with the long time. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moody. And I think you answered my next question, which is how you would ensure implementation of the LTS, but all your points on the holistic stakeholder engagement, ensuring people are bought into the process, since it's planning and the data analysis, ensuring the economic benefits, the policy alignments, and capacity building in MRV, it's all part of how you ensure implementation of the LTS. If there's anything else you want to add, please feel free to. I also see a couple of questions from the audience. I will read those now. Thank you for your informative and thoughtful presentations. There may be certain technologies which are not yet proven, but LTS is being based on that, like CCUS, not proven, though huge investment has been made so far. So it can be short, mid, long-term planning. That's more of a comment, but if there's any reflections from the panelists, please feel free to chime in.
Yeah, let me quickly respond to that. Yes, because not the current technology alone may not be able to achieve allow countries to achieve net zero emissions. And in several long-term strategies, it was clearly mentioned that certain level of emission will remain unless new technology will be implemented widely, particularly areas called hard-to-abate sectors, such as industry production for steel, cement, and chemical product, as well as some types of agricultural products. And one of the message from long-term strategy, it depends on the country, but is the need for technology investment, research, development, and demonstration, as well as international corporations. For, let's say, the high-income country like US, they illustrated the areas of policy investment, public investment for the new technologies. And in case of, let's say, Nigeria, I assume that the availability of technology and required finance for some key technologies are integral part of this long-term strategy. So that's, yeah. That's for me for now. I hope this is something useful for the audience.
Thank you, very helpful. The next question is the net zero investment plan done following each of the scenarios? Is there an NDC investment plan or strategy? This sounds like a question to Ms. Moody, if this was done for Nigeria, for example.
Thank you very much. The net zero investment plan is very crucial when it comes to having a implementable document. And it is very essential across all the scenarios to find the mitigation options of that scenario. So every identified mitigation option from the scenarios, most net zero investment plan. We are not doing individual investment plan for each of the scenarios. We are having Nigeria national investment plan cut across all the scenarios and all the identified mitigation options and beyond, something that and also make is very holistic in approach. And what we have done is to make sure that we're aligning the NDC investment needs with the long-term emission development investment need. And we have brought on board the financial sectors within Nigeria to do also to align the costing of the scenarios with the current economic situation and GDP growth in Nigeria. So basically, it's a holistic approach that's going to address all round. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Amadi. And one more question from the audience. It's in talking about net zero emission, the calculation is sometimes tricky. There are many such instances like massive tree plantation, how to address this issue. Do you have any insights on that topic of addressing the complication of net zero emission calculation?
Yes, this might not be the only answer, but I think this is the issues of uncertainty and assumption for long-term scenarios. So yes, and as Shar from the audience rightly pointed out, that the emissions and the removal from forestries are often very ambiguous, particularly in countries who have not yet developed robust data collection and management mechanism on forestry and greenhouse gas inventory. And so one way is, as Kiyoma mentioned, that it's very important that countries start from what you have and then strengthen the framework and technical capacity to collect accurate data as much as possible. Of course, there is the issues of cost implication and required a number of staff, but it's important to have to develop robust MRV mechanism with the data. And another aspect is the how to address uncertainty, because there are many uncertainties about energy price. Next year is uncertainty, inflation rate, GDP growth. No one can predict the GDP growth accurately for the next 10 years. And the emission, it has some implication of emissions, but for the NDC and particularly long-term strategies, it is about to guide the direction of countries' policy in a way that emission reduction will benefit for the national development, other important priority of countries. And for the NDCs, country need to report these assumptions and the certainty and methodologies. So I hope this mechanism and the NDC cycle of submitting every 5 years and the reporting what you have right now and every 2 years under BTL, and then continue to reflect the elements of long-term strategy, NDCs and the BTL is one of the way forward to address this issue. Yeah, over.
Thank you, Ms. Kenichi. And with that, we're very close to the end of the webinar. So I wanted to take an opportunity to thank you the audience for joining us today and raising your questions. And also Mr. Kenichi for your time to present the NDC cycle process, and Ms. Moody for the excellent example from Nigeria's LTS submission. And please join us for upcoming webinars. If there are any questions in the meanwhile, please feel free to email us at the secretariat@globalclimateactionpartnership.org. And thank you and have a great rest of your days or evenings. And we hope to see you next month for the next webinar.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.